All right, so we've got physics working in 2D. Now, one of the things about physics in 2D is it's really, right, only set up to function in a, right, in an environment where the y direction, right, because in this case, x is a horizontal position, y is a vertical position. If I click on the move tool and go back to my scene window, you can see I have my two axes here. So I have green, which is y, and red, which is x. And z, right, does more or less doesn't get used. That's not entirely true. You could put things in the z-axis if you wanted to. But so one of the issues with this, right, I can actually lift this up and it should drop again. Yep. But it's only going to drop with y in the up direction or y in the down direction. The other way you can set your physics up a little bit differently, and I want to go ahead and show you how to do that. So I'm going to stop this. And if you go to File, or sorry, excuse me, you go to Edit, you go down to Project Settings, and you go down to Physics or Physics 2D over here. Physics is for the 3D physics engine. And you'll see this is where you set gravity and the direction of gravity, right? So in our case, gravity is negative 9.81, and that would be, you know, units per second in unity, but right, it's based on meters per second, is the acceleration, right, due to gravity in the y direction. Now, note that we could change this so acceleration happens in the z direction or acceleration happens in the x direction. If I go to Physics 2D, I only have the options of using, you know, the x or the y direction. So if I was, say, doing a top-down, if I was doing a top-down 2D game, and I wanted gravity to be a part of that, that would be tricky with this orientation. So there's a couple ways I could do it. Just to throw this out there so you all can think about this, but one of the ways that I could do this is I could either, using the project settings, I could either leave everything oriented this way, and instead of using the 2D physics objects, which is going to limit me with some of the force, like the constant force things and some other of those features, but I could just set the gravity to be in the z direction, right? So that everything is falling, you know, essentially away from the camera in its current orientation. The other option I would have would be to just reorient my camera so that rather than up being y and x, right, I could rotate I could adjust my camera so that what I'm looking at is I'm doing orthographic, but I'm actually, right, looking down on the game map from above in the y direction, and xz is the 2D plane. So that's another option, and then I could use the 2D physics engine potentially in that way if I wanted things to be able to jump and have physics apply. Typically with 2D games, you don't necessarily need to worry about that. But those are things to think about. Something else I haven't mentioned yet is this white outline here is the outside edges of the camera, right? So even if I don't have the camera selected, this shows me the frame of where things are happening in camera at any given moment in my game. All right, so let's go ahead and look at adding motion to this and adding control to this using a flow graph. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and, something to note, if you are doing this in a new project, and this is something I've already done, you may note that you don't have the option of, if you go to create a component and object, let's say I select this and I want to be able to control this. So I'm going to click on Add Component, and Bolt might not be here, right? And that's because even though we installed it for a previous project, we need to install it for this project, right? So if that's the case, just go to Window, go to Package Manager, and I believe it's in the Unity registry. Let's see here. Nope. I'm going to say, I can't remember, it's My Assets. There we go. That's where I have it downloaded. It's something, My Assets is what you download from the from the Unity store. So, right, I have Bolt here, and I would just click import the stuff, and then you could refer back to that very first tutorial with Bolt where I show you how to do the install. But mainly, right, you import it, and then you go up to Tools at the top, and you go down to Install Bolt. And then once you do that, it's going to ask you to import a bunch more assets. You do that, and then you go through and you choose what type you want to do. Right, you go to Bolt, and you use the Setup Wizard, and you choose which orientation you want. Like, do you want programmer language or non-programmer language? And those steps are pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so let's pretend that you've done that, and now we have the ability to create a graph. So I'm going to select my player, which in this case, why don't we just go ahead and create a new asset? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to Import New Asset, and I'm going to pop back to, let's see here, I'm just going to type in Bob, see if I can find Bob Ross in here again. It's Bob_Ross. Let's see if I can find him. There he is. So, I actually have him already in my assets folder. But if not, why don't you go ahead and find that? I'm going to click on this again, and I've got this Bob Ross 1. I'm going to rename this. I'm just going to call, for some reason that did not let me rename it. There we go. I'm just going to call it Bobby. And so Bobby's a little different from the other Bob, but if I select this, he's going to pop up huge. And then, he's a 2D asset that I brought in, and I want him to be a sprite. So I'm going to go ahead and set my texture type to sprite, 2D, and UI. And as soon as I have done that, I want to make sure I hit apply, or else nothing's going to happen and I won't be able to figure out why. And now that Bobby's there, I can just drag Bobby into the scene, and there he is. And now we have Bob Ross, and so everything in the world is fine and wonderful. All right, so let's go ahead and scale Bob Ross down, and we'll use the rect tool to do that because, it focuses just on 2 dimensions. I'm going to hold down Shift so Bob doesn't get, out of whack. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a collider because, there's no collider on this whatsoever. So I need to go to Physics 2D. I'm going to do a box collider because he is rectangular. And at least for the time being, I'm not too worried about the corners of this catching on things. And then we could go ahead and add a rigid body component to this. So I'm going to go to Physics 2D again. I'm going to go down to Rigid Body 2D. And now that I've done that, Bob is also now ready for a flow graph. Now, you'll notice I already have a couple flow machines on here. I'm actually using the second one, which is empty, but if you don't have a flow machine on here, just go ahead and go to Add Component, Bolt, Flow Machine. And you could create a macro for this. It might be wise to have a macro at this point because we are going to, you might want to reuse this, this code. So I'm going to go ahead and click New, and I'm going to just call it 2D character motion. And if there's a scripts folder, there is. I'm just going to go ahead and save that. Okay. Now, right now I've got update and I've got my start event. I'm not going to need the start event at all, so I'm going to get rid of that. But what I am going to need is I need a way to move this. Now, remember from previous character motion stuff, in 3D mode, when you're using a rigid body, you do not you do not make any changes to the transform of the object to the position, rotation, or scale. You apply changes to the rigid body, and you do that by using either add force or by setting the velocity. And so we're going to go ahead and do this through the set velocity option. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is, we're going to need to say, okay, from update, we're going to want to be updating our motion. And in order to do that, we need to get our input in our horizontal axis, which we've done before. So we can just go ahead and click and drag and type input. Oops, if I can spell it right, input.getAxis. And if I just say get A, it should bring that up as my first option. There it is. So the axis name is going to be capital H horizontal. And we're not going to need the y-axis at all, right? In the vertical axis, because in 3D space we need to be able to move in the XZ plane and then be able to jump in the third dimension. Whereas in 2D, right, we're only moving. In this case, this will be like a side scroller or whatever. So we're only going to be moving left and right, and then we can jump to go up. But that's going to be a different type of input than the input get axis. And we'll talk about top-down motion in a little bit. So I got my input get axis. I'm going to get this. And then what I need to do from here is I want to set the velocity of the rigid body. So I'm just going to go ahead, and we're just going to go straight over and do this. But I'm going to go ahead and say rigid body, but it's going to be rigid body 2D. And then there's a whole bunch of options here. There's add force and everything else. So I could either do that mode, or I could say just rigid body 2D dot velocity and set. Okay, right? And so you'll note that I have a two-dimensional array, or a vector 2 here, which is right because I only have motion really in two directions. I can't have motion in the z-axis unless I change this unit. And so what I need to do is I need to set this into one of these two options. So I'm going to need to create another unit. So I'm just going to say new vector 2, because we're using vector 2s, and then xy. And so I can take this horizontal motion, I can run it into the x. And again, and then I can feed this out in the vector 2 out to the vector 2 input here. And then I just need to adjust my flow so it actually connects right between here. So this is the most basic, and we're probably going to move really slowly. So let's go ahead and get started and play this and see if we move at all, because all we're sending out, right, is a -1, a +1, or a 0. And so if I press D, I'm not even moving anywhere. I'm getting so little motion. In fact, for some reason, nothing's happening at all. And that is probably because I neglected to turn this flow machine on. And so now, hey, there we go. I've got side motion, right? So I can move back and forth. I'm moving really, really slow because I haven't set a speed yet, right? And you'll note that I do slide a little bit as well, and we'll talk about friction so you don't just keep sliding off the edge of platforms or things. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And now what I need to do is I need to make it so I have a little bit more freedom in terms of how quickly I move. And so I'm going to go ahead and I could either create a graph variable. It might be better to have this be an object variable because then it'll show up out here. And you'll see that I was doing some other stuff, and so I'm going to get rid of some of these because I'm going to leave jump force. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's go ahead and just type in speed. So if I hit speed and I hit plus, and then do I want this to be a vector 3? No, I want this to be a float, and I want this value to be, let's just say, let's set it at 10 for the time being. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down. And again, most simply, I could just go ahead and click on this, click again, and it looks like I have every option in the world. So I'm just going to say multiply, because I'm going to want to multiply 10 by whatever value this is coming out of horizontal, right? So maybe because this automatically attaches to the top one, I'll just bring this multiply up and wish that I hadn't, because I just pulled my screen everywhere. Okay, so right, so I've got this multiply, and we need to fit this into this chain of events. So I'm going to multiply whatever this is, that -1, 0, whatever, by 10, and then I'm going to send the output of that into my vector 2. And let's see what happens here. Okay. So I should, oh, right, so something I forgot to do that I did while this was playing was to turn this on. So I'm going to turn that back on again. I'm going to click in here. Now things are going. For some reason, I am getting vertical speed, and if you look at my graph, you'll understand why. right? What did I do wrong? Instead of connecting this into the X, I actually connected it to the Y. So now we sort of very slowly float or fly down more quickly, which is not really what we're going for. So let's go ahead and I can just break this real quick so we can test it, and then I'll stop it and fix it for real. Okay, so now if I click in my game scene, you can see that, right, I'm moving a little bit faster. Now, there's going to be a few issues that come up here in a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a second. You'll note that one of those is that Bob is rotating all over the place, right? He can hit other rigid bodies. Now he's upside down. But yeah, there's some problems here with, you know, how Bob is moving. This isn't probably the type of motion we're all hoping for. And so let's go ahead and talk about why that's happening and how we can fix that. It's actually a really simple fix. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this. I'm going to make sure that these changes stayed, but I want to turn my flow machine on so I don't keep forgetting to do that. Okay, so this is working somewhat well. Now, something that we might want to do is to use time delta time like we've used previously to make sure the steps are the right size and we don't have speed that kind of varies all over the place, right? Because right now, if there's some change in how much time it takes to render this frame versus the previous frame, I'm going to be speeding up or slowing down a little bit. And anybody who plays this and has something like that happen on their system is going to be really frustrated by the performance. So let's go ahead and add a unit. We're going to add time dot, and if I just do time.de, I'll get time.delta time. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to copy this multiply unit because what we're going to do is we want to multiply the output of this by this, which also means, right, our speed's going to have to be faster, but it also gives us more fine-tuned control with, you know, larger numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and say time delta time. I'm going to bring this down to be multiplied here. So these two things are multiplied together, right? Because time delta time is going to be a really small value, but it makes sure that we are keeping our speed uniform throughout the whole experience. So then once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and find my speed variable. I'm going to go to the object variables here. I'm going to go down to speed, and I'll probably just make this 100 to start with, and we'll see how fast I go. So let's do this fix. Let's make sure it works, and then we will add one more. Now, right, when you're working with Bolt or really with any coding whatsoever, you know, I have no idea why I have so much drag, which is kind of hilarious. But look, so I'm getting actually a pretty good speed here, left and right again. Yeah, I'm not sure why. I'm going to have to check my rigid body. For some reason, my gravity seems to be really off, but that's okay. So, right, so here comes Bob pushing stuff around. You know, he's not really operating the way I would like him to, but he is moving back and forth at a decent speed. And if there's, you know, changes in how my system's working, he will be able to still move at a similar rate across the screen. Okay, so how do I get him to stop from rotating? Right, because I don't want him to, there he goes, slowly sliding down the screen. I'm still not 100% sure what's going on with that, but I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And, okay, so I've got my speed right, but what I need to do is I don't want him to be rotating, right? And this is because, right, he is a rigid body object, right? He's, you know, he has mass and he's tipping up on a corner and then falling over. And so I want to fix that. I want to make that not happen. And so one of the ways I can do that is there's this option here in the rigid body tag on Bob that says constraints. If I flip that down, you'll see that I can choose to freeze my position in the X or Y dimension, right? So I could freeze this in the Y so I can't go up and down. I can just go left and right. Or the other option is I can freeze rotation in the Z. If I do that and then go ahead and play this again, then Bob should not tip over when he comes to the edge and his center of mass goes over that edge. Now, again, I'm not sure why I'm getting such, stuff, but if I come over here and I'm on the edge of this object, you'll see that I can get all the way out and then I fall off, right? So this is, no matter what I'm doing, I'm not tipping over. This is more like the what we want to have happen for our characters. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Okay, so we have Bob moving. However, Bob is not falling. He's falling like a leaf, right? Like Bob is very gently descending towards the ground. He is not falling at negative 9.81 units per second. And so the question is why? If we look at our graph, the answer is not going to be obvious right away, most likely. But the problem is here where we create this new vector and we send it into our velocity. Because what we're doing is we're setting our velocity, right? We're taking whatever, we don't care what the previous velocity was. We're just totally overriding it with this new velocity, right? And so what's happening is that because the rigid body is being impacted by physics and gravity, right? The gravity engine is saying, okay, our velocity should, in the y direction, should be negative 9.81. And so it is for a little bit. And then our graph says, oh no, the velocity in the y direction should be 0. And so then it isn't. So then it's 0 for a little bit. And then it's negative 9.81 for a little bit. Then it's 0 for a little bit. Then it's negative 9.81, right? So it's going back and forth really quickly between those things, which is what we really want to do is we want to make sure that we are not overriding our velocity, right? So we actually need to grab the velocity before we go and reset it, because we want that to be the same, right? We want that to be a continuous thing. So that means that later when we go and we create part of the graph that will allow us to jump, we can, right, we're not overriding that jump that we just did either. Okay. And actually, we may just actually overwrite the y for the jump and then let it, when it's not jumping, let it be free. But to do this, what we're going to do is we need to right click, we need to say add unit, and we need to say, I think if I just type in velocity, yeah, it's going to pull this up. And so I want on my rigid body 2D, I want to get the velocity, right? And so I want to get the velocity. And in particular, what I want is the y value out of that. So if I just drop down here and I just say get as my option there, it's going to go down. I can come down to vector2.y get. I can grab that, pull this over. And then I can just connect this to the y value for this new vector 2. So, right, so whatever my previous velocity was, whenever I'm doing horizontal motion, it's just, rather than overriding it with a 0, it's just going to essentially transmit whatever it previously was into the new body, because my left and right motion should not be controlling my vertical motion in any way. So let's go ahead and play this and see if Bob falls a little bit faster than he used to. Okay, so yeah, Bob is falling at the right rate. Hooray, right? So we've got side-to-side motion, and we've got Bob falling down the hill. Now, something I'm going to do right now, because I want to show you some faults with the collider that we're using, is we're going to copy this element, and we're going to make a ramp. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. I'm going to select this square. I'm going to hit, I'm going to copy and paste it, and then I'm going to drag this over. And I'm going to use my rotate tool, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate this so it's at an angle. And I'll make it reasonably, somewhat steep. If I make it too steep, I'm not going to be able to climb up it at all. And then I'm going to use my rect tool. I'm just going to drag this up so that they're connected like this. All right, so then I'm going to come up this ramp. And so let's go ahead and see how this goes in its current state. Okay, so I've got Bob here, and I'm going to try and go up this ramp. Now, you'll see that I'm actually going up that ramp reasonably smoother than I expected. But that oftentimes, depending on what this shape looks like, I can get really rough, bumpy motion up this ramp. I was hoping it would be a little bit bumpier than it is, but you know, it's nice and smooth. So what we can do is we can stop this, and because we don't have to worry about Bob tipping it over anymore, because our rigid body is set to have no rotation in the Z, we can go ahead and use a Capsule Collider instead. So let's go ahead and say Physics 2D, Capsule Collider 2D. I am on the wrong object. We do not want that on that cube. Let's select Bob. There we go. And we're going to go down to Add Component and go to Physics 2D, Capsule Collider 2D. And then we should be able to pull this up through our thing. There it is. It's right below the rigid body. I am going to turn this box collider off. I might actually just go ahead and remove it. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this up above. And you'll note there's certain places where, for whatever reason, I can't get this blue line to show up, but other places I can. So I'm going to pull it up there. If for some reason you're having a really aggravating time moving it around, if you click on the three little dots here, you can always say move up or move down. Okay, so now if I open this up and select this, right, I've got this like rounded thing. You'll note that I might want to make my, oops, not what I wanted to do. I might want to make my collider bigger because, right, I'm going to cut into the other object that I'm colliding with a little bit, but we're going to just go ahead and see what this looks like, right? So typically this is going to give us much smoother motion, especially if it's like a staircase or something like that we're going up. We're not going to be jarring by hitting against each and every thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we can get some jump functionality working, right? Right now we've got this ramp, and there's another, well, we're going to leave the ramp there because I want to show you some other fun things we can do with the 2D physics engine. Okay, so we've got our horizontal motion set up, so much so that we should probably go ahead and hold down Command or Control and click and drag to make this a group, right? And I'm going to call this horizontal motion. Okay, so we've got our horizontal motion down. So now we need to say, okay, well, what happens when we jump? How are we going to determine that? And you know, what are the implications for that, right? So first, we're going to want to be able to get keyboard input or you know, get button input, whatever it is. And so if you remember from a long time ago, if we go down to our project settings, and in this we go to the player tab, sorry, not the player tab, the input manager. We flip open our axes. Right, we've got all sorts of options in here, but predominantly we have these things that are named, right? Horizontal and vertical, which we've used. The one we don't have right now we're not using is jump, but you'll note that the positive button is the spacebar by default. And so this is what we're going to want to use. Rather than use the other, you know, get keyboard input or whatever, this is going to be something where if we were to, you know, somebody was to plug in a gamepad, right, they'd be able to use the jump button on the gamepad or the spacebar or whatever they wanted to use in order to jump. So we're going to go ahead and use this rather than setting it to a particular key. So how do I do that? So first I'm going to say input .get, and now this is a button, I believe, is what we're going to do, and so we're going to say input get button down button name. All right, so our button name is going to be jump, and what this does is it gives us a true or a false value, right? So, and you probably can't read that on whatever, but that's all right. So, right, so we need to be able to jump, right? So input get button down jump is what we want to do. It's going to send out a true or false value. And so then we need to take some action based on whether that's true or false. And so the next object we're going to want to create here is a branch function. So I'm going to say branch, and I'm going to go ahead and connect jump, or connect the true or false value coming out of that. And now I have these two options. Now, one of them, the question is, where do we want to connect this to the remainder of to the rest of our graph, right? Because in the end, we want to set this velocity. And I might actually just pull this out here, but we'll see. But what would be great is all I want to be doing is setting the velocity in the y direction. And so I want to be able to do one set of steps if it's true and one set of steps if it's false. And so let's go ahead and look at how to do that. So I've increased the size of my of the graph by double clicking so you could all see this better. And so, so the question is, what do I want to do if this is true? If it's true, I want to do what we've done previously, which is essentially add 10 units of force to the velocity. I want to make the velocity in the y direction temporarily 10, right? I want to just blast all the way up there. And if it's false, I don't want to do anything, right? So the not doing anything is really what's happening here, right? Where whatever our velocity in the y direction was, it's being set back to that here. Whereas in this case, I want to be able to override that. I'm going to want the x and y, the x stuff to still be happening, but I want to be able to reset this value. So let's go ahead, and to start with, I can even just copy this new vector 2 and bring this down here, because this is and say, okay, true, I want to come here, and I just want y to be 10, and then I want to run this into here. Oh, but you'll see that I can't have two of these inputs going in from two different sources, so I'm going to need to figure out how to do this in a different way. So let's go ahead and figure that out. So if I can't set it here, I need to figure out how to put these together in a way that will work. And so, rather than have two of these units, maybe what I can do is I can have one branch that one of these branches connect here and to here, and then maybe I have a second branch that does something slightly different. So let's go ahead and try that out. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one for the time being, because I'm going to select both of these. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to paste them. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this out here as well. I'm going to disconnect the flow. So, I'm going to go from update to get this, check for the axis. Then I'm going to immediately check to see if I'm jumping. And if I have decided to jump, then I'm going to do this set of actions down here. But let's start with the false. If I'm not jumping, we want this to work, right? So we want to just still be able to have whatever our previous one was set and go through there. Now, if I do jump, what I want to do is I still want this value. I still want to be able to have the x value, right, stay the same, but I'm going to want to set the y value to 10 temporarily. So I'm going to go ahead and then say, okay, well, let's connect this to true, connect this down here, and let's see how this works, and then we'll clean things up a little bit if it's functional. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and come down here. Now I have not set a ground check, so there's no way to know if Bob's on the ground or not. He's going to jump. And it looks like I have a problem here where something is being set. Oh, but I do have horizontal. Oh, I'm not getting any horizontal motion. So something is wrong with my graph. You will note that, right, this is false, but I'm still not getting any motion here. And don't know what happened. I must have clicked on something, but you can see that I'm actually not getting a connection here, which is also why this was falling so slowly. So let's try this again. Okay, so now I can slide back and forth. Hey, look at that. And then if I hit the space bar, there we go. Now I can get an actual jump, right? And so the reason I wasn't moving any is because I wasn't actually changing my velocity, right? So now Bob can jump, and I currently just have this hard-coded for a value of 10. So let's go ahead and stop this. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And so instead of having this be 10 here, I know that I have this jump force variable I created. If you don't have that, go ahead and type in jump force, make it a float, set the value to 10. And we can just drag this down here and apply it. Okay. So now I could adjust my strength, right? If I want him to have a pretty weak jump, I could set that value to 5. If I wanted him to be able to fly to the moon, I could set it to 1,000. But we don't want Bob to be able to fly that far at this point in the process. But right, so 5 seems like a, maybe a more modest jump. Now there's maybe a little bit of a problem here. Let's see. Oh, there goes Bob. I can see him. Come on. Scoot that thing off of there. All right. All right, so now Bob's sitting on the banana. He's really happy. Okay. So now there's something you may have noticed already, right? The camera is not moving with my player, right? He's going off the screen. He's dropping off the bottom, off the sides, and we need to fix that. So how are we going to make that change? But first, let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit.